Some mornings, I make the drive to Harlow Beach before the sun has fully risen. I sit on this porch like it belongs to me, because in every way that truly matters, it does. The drive is a familiar 25 minutes from my place, door to door, if the light on Carpenter Road cooperates. My truck knows the turns before I do. Saturday mornings, mostly. Sometimes Sunday. Occasionally a Wednesday, when something I can't quite name pulls me out here midweek, and I find myself watching the Atlantic go gray, and then gold, from a chair I built with my own 2 hands. My name is Warren. I'm 68 years old, and I spent 40 years as a structural engineer. I see the bones of a building, the load-bearing walls, the places where pressure collects. I retired 4 years ago, but that way of seeing things never really leaves you. You spend 4 decades reading blueprints. You start reading everything else the same way, people included. I live alone now, have for 8 years, since June passed. My house in Calverton is modest, with a yellow front door June picked out, because she said it made the whole street look happier. I never changed it. I don't plan to. But this house, the one I'm sitting in front of right now, this one is different. It's a single story, built low and wide, the way beach houses should be, so the wind doesn't get ideas. Heart pine floors throughout, the kind that darken to amber over time and hold the warmth of the sun long after it sets. Wide doorways, no steps up from the front walk, which I designed on purpose. My daughter Nora had a bad fall off her bicycle back in 2018. Left knee, 2 surgeries. I wasn't going to build her a house that fought her every time she came home. The windows face the water. All of them. I spent 2 weeks arguing with myself about the structural implications and then did it anyway, because some things matter more than load calculations. I finished it 14 months ago, March of last year. I built it for Nora. I finished it in the year she and Brett marked 12 years of marriage, though the house was never about Brett and never about the marriage. It was about Nora, and about Gracie, who is 8 years old and has her grandmother's laugh, loud and sudden and completely unself-conscious. The kind of laugh that makes strangers in restaurants turn around and smile. I did not build it for myself. That distinction matters. It's the whole point of this story, in a way. I reach through the front door, which I leave unlocked on the mornings I come early, and I pick up the small framed photograph from the side table just inside. June, maybe 10 years before she got sick, standing on a beach that isn't this one. Her hair is doing what it always did in salt air, which is whatever it wanted. She's laughing at something off camera. She looks like herself. I put this photo here when the house was finished, not at my place in Calverton. Here, people who know me have asked about that. My buddy Sal from the old firm, my neighbor Ted, they ask why I didn't keep it at home, and I've never had a clean answer for them. The best I can say is this. My house in Calverton is where I live. This house is where the promise is, and June was the one who made me make the promise. It felt right to put her here. This is where the story ends. This porch this morning. This particular slant of April light on the water. But to understand why I'm sitting here, why any of this matters, I have to take you back to the beginning. To a hospital hallway that smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. To a woman's hand in mine. To a promise I made before I fully understood what keeping it would cost. This house has a story. I'm going to tell you all of it. I didn't know then that the most dangerous thing about this house wasn't the money I put into it. It was what it meant to someone else. 8 years ago, I stood in a hospital corridor that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, and I made a promise I didn't fully understand yet. That's the honest way to say it. I didn't understand it. I thought I did. I nodded. I said the words. I meant them the way a man means things when he's standing at the edge of losing everything, but the full weight of what I'd agreed to didn't settle on me until much later. Until I was alone in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, with a sleeping infant and a house that had gone completely, permanently quiet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. March 2017. Mercy General, 3rd floor, the hallway outside room 314. The fluorescent light above the nurse's station buzzed with a sound like a trapped insect. I remember that sound. I remember it the way you remember things that were happening while your life was changing. Not because they mattered, but because they were there. June had been sick for 14 months by then. Breast cancer, caught late, fought hard. She was 49 years old, and she fought it the way she did everything else, methodically, without self-pity, and with an occasional dark humor that unnerved her oncologist and made the nurses adore her. She made it longer than they told us she would. That was very June. I won't describe what she looked like at the end. That's not mine to put into words. What I will tell you is this: her hands were still hers. Even then. Long fingers, the knuckle of her left ring finger slightly enlarged from the arthritis that had started in her 40s. I held that hand for most of the last 2 days. I know every line of it. She spoke to me just before midnight on a Tuesday. Her voice was low, lower than it used to be, and she had to stop twice to find her breath. But her eyes were clear. That's the thing I want you to understand. Her eyes were completely clear. "Take care of our girls, Warren," she said. "Both of them. Nora still needs her father, even if she doesn't always know how to say it. And this little one." She paused, turned her head slightly toward the small bassinet the nurse had wheeled in so June could see her. "Gracie, 4 days old, born into a family that was simultaneously expanding and breaking apart. This little one is going to need to know what real love looks like. Make sure she sees it." I told her I would. She died 6 hours later, at 5:47 in the morning, while the sky outside was doing that thing it does in early spring, turning from black to a dark, uncertain blue, not quite committing to dawn. I drove home alone. Nora was at the hospital still. Her husband, Brett, had come to get her, and her friend was there. The promise June made me make was simple: make sure Nora and Gracie were cared for, truly loved. I thought it meant providing for them, being there for them. I thought it meant building a home, a sanctuary. That's why I built the beach house, a place for Nora and Brett and Gracie to make memories, to find joy, to feel secure. It was my gift, a monument to June's love, and a tangible expression of my own. I signed the deed over to Nora, a pure, unconditional gift for her 12th wedding anniversary. A new beginning, I thought. But the most dangerous thing about that house wasn't the money I poured into it. It was what it meant to someone else. The day I drove over to visit for their anniversary, I stopped short when I saw a stranger standing in front of the door, holding a clipboard, casually taking pictures of the entire house. My heart pounded. Looking inside, I caught my son-in-law Brett hiding behind the thin living room curtains, standing perfectly still and staring right at me instead of coming out to greet me. A cold chill ran down my spine. I knew something was wrong. This wasn't the first time I'd felt a prickle of unease about Brett. He was Nora's husband, a smooth talker, always impeccably dressed, a financial advisor who seemed to have an answer for everything. But there were small things. The way he'd subtly steer conversations, the way he'd always seem to be too busy for family gatherings, the way he'd occasionally make a dismissive comment about Nora's teaching salary. I'd brushed them off, attributing them to my own overprotective father instincts. But now, seeing him like that, a knot tightened in my stomach. I remembered the times I'd visited Nora's old house. Brett had a habit of leaving his laptop open on the kitchen counter, angled just so, as if he'd just stepped away for a moment. I never paid it much mind. Until one Wednesday evening, Gracie had asked me to fix the back porch light. The bulb had been flickering for a week, and she had decided, with the complete conviction of an 8-year-old, that the darkness it left behind was not ordinary darkness, but the specific kind that warranted concern. It was a standard fixture replacement, but in practice, it took 40 minutes because the bulb size Gracie described did not match what I found in the socket, which meant a drive to the hardware store 2 miles down Route 17 and back. By the time the porch light was burning steadily, and Gracie had stood under it for a satisfied moment, and then been walked upstairs and settled, it was 20 past 9. Nora had gone to bed at 9, citing a faculty meeting at 7 the next morning. Brett had said goodnight around 8:45, mentioning an early call. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, dried them, and reached for my jacket on the hook by the door. That was when I saw the laptop. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, the section of counter between the coffee maker and the far wall, a surface that generally held the fruit bowl and Gracie's school papers. Brett had been using it as a secondary workspace since he moved in, setting up there in the evenings when Nora was grading papers in the living room. The screen was still lit, angled the way a person angles a screen when they step away briefly and intend to return. I understood later, when I had time to think it through carefully, exactly why it was there, and why the screen was still active. In 6 months of visiting Nora's house, I had not once stayed past 9 o'clock. That was not an approximate pattern. It was a fixed one, the kind that a man who paid attention to routines would have registered and relied upon. Brett was a man who paid attention to routines. He had moved around this house for 7 weeks with the ease of someone who had mapped all the variables and found them predictable. He had not mapped for a burned-out porch bulb and an 8-year-old who was afraid of the dark. I did not touch the laptop. I positioned myself at a distance of approximately 4 feet and read what was on the screen. The email was from R. Holt. The subject line was fully visible in the preview pane. Refinance application, 14 Harlow Beach Road, $280,000. Below it, the body of the email was partially visible, 2 complete lines before the text continued below the screen edge. The first line referenced a power of attorney document. The second contained a specific date, November 1st. I took my phone from my jacket pocket and photographed the screen from where I stood. 1 image. I checked that it was legible, the subject line clear, the partial body text readable, the date unambiguous, and put my phone back in my pocket. Then I stood in the dark kitchen with my jacket half on and did not move for a moment. A refinance application, $280,000, drawn against a property worth $390,000, owned by my daughter. In a house I had built and signed over to her deed, and nothing more. A power of attorney, which meant someone needed to sign on behalf of a property holder. Nora's name was on the deed. Mine was not. A POA in Brett's favor, granted by Nora, would give him authority to act on the property's behalf in financial transactions, to refinance it, to encumber it, to extract from it whatever a lender would allow. But a POA requires the granting party to sign willingly and with full competence. A person who is confused, who forgets things, who seems to be losing the clarity that they once had. That person is a person whose family might reasonably step in to help, to manage things on their behalf, to take on responsibilities the older person can no longer reliably handle. I stood in the dark kitchen and thought about the Saturdays I had driven home, feeling heavier than the drive warranted, the afternoons that had blurred, the evenings in Calverton when I had sat down in the kitchen chair and not moved for 2 hours. I had been attributing those things to being 68, which is a reasonable attribution, because 68 carries its own legitimate weight. That was when I understood what the coffee was actually for. I had no evidence for that thought, nothing beyond a pattern I had not yet fully assembled, and a logic that had just locked into place like a load-bearing joint clicking home. I did not say it to myself as a conclusion. I registered it as the kind of possibility that once it has entered the mind, does not leave quietly. I left without turning on any additional lights, and I drove home with the windows down despite the cold. The following morning, I was back at Nora's house before 8 o'clock with a set of lug wrenches I had genuinely left in the back corner of the garage. The previous evening, I remembered setting them down when I was looking for the fixture wrench and genuinely forgetting them in the shuffle. The reason for returning was true, which made delivering it easier. Nora was in the kitchen when I arrived. Coffee made, Gracie already dressed for school. Brett was out at a showing. Nora said he had left at 7:30. His jacket was hanging on the coat rack by the mudroom door. It was unzipped. A white envelope had slipped partially from the interior breast pocket, tilted at the angle that things tilt when they have been folded quickly and not quite secured. The envelope's address window faced outward. Through it, printed in the red block font that lending institutions reserve for correspondence they need you to take seriously, I could read 3 words clearly. Past due. $47,000. I retrieved my lug wrenches from the garage. I said goodbye to Nora, and as I walked out, I saw the coffee pot on the counter. The one on the right, the one Brett used. It was still full. He hadn't had time to drink it. That was the last piece of the puzzle. The coffee he'd been making for Nora, the one she'd been drinking every morning, the one that had made her so forgetful, so confused. He was drugging her, slowly, subtly, to make her appear incompetent, so he could get her to sign a power of attorney, refinance the house I'd built for her, and pay off his own mounting debts. The $47,000 past due notice was the final, horrifying confirmation. I didn't confront him immediately. I went home, my mind racing. I called Sal, my old friend and a sharp lawyer. I laid out everything: the laptop screen, the POA, the past due notice, the subtle changes in Nora's behavior, the coffee. Sal listened patiently, then told me to gather more evidence, discreetly. We needed a doctor's assessment of Nora, a clear paper trail, and a way to prove Brett's intent. The next few weeks were a blur of quiet investigation. I installed hidden cameras in Nora's kitchen, disguised as a clock. I collected samples of her coffee. I encouraged Nora to see a doctor for her fatigue and memory issues, gently suggesting it might be stress. The doctor, a kind woman I knew, ran tests. The results were inconclusive for any natural illness, but she did note a pattern of cognitive impairment that was unusual for Nora's age. Then came the day I had to act. The cameras caught Brett, late one night, adding a fine powder to Nora's coffee grounds. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I had enough. The confrontation was swift and brutal. I called Nora and Brett to the beach house, under the pretense of discussing some repairs. I had Sal there, and a detective I'd quietly contacted. I laid out the evidence: the photos of the laptop, the past due notice, the doctor's report, and finally, the video footage. Nora's face, as she watched the video of her husband poisoning her, was a mask of disbelief, then horror, then a profound, gut-wrenching sadness. Brett tried to deny it, to spin a story, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested on the spot. The aftermath was devastating. Nora was heartbroken, betrayed by the man she loved, the father of her child. It took months of therapy, of support from me and Gracie, for her to begin to heal. The beach house, once a symbol of love and security, became a place of painful memories. But over time, it also became a symbol of resilience. Nora decided to keep the house. She said it was a reminder of June's promise, and of her own strength. She got a new job, one that allowed her more flexibility and less stress. Gracie, thankfully, was too young to fully grasp the depth of her father's betrayal, but she understood that her mother was sad, and that Grandpa was there to make things better. This morning, I drove out to Harlow Beach. The sun was fully up, and the cold was something to walk through rather than stand in. On the way back to the house, we passed Audrey's porch. She was there in her usual chair with her usual cup, and she raised a hand when she saw us. I raised mine back. That was sufficient. In the kitchen, Nora made breakfast, and Gracie set the table without being asked, which she did approximately once every 3 weeks, and which Nora and I both pretended was entirely normal, so as not to disrupt the pattern. I sat at the end of the table and drank coffee. Nora's coffee, the pot on the left, and I looked at the house I had built from the inside, the pine floors, the wide doorways, the window above the sink that caught the morning light and held it. I left in the early afternoon. Nora walked me out to the truck. She said she was thinking of calling the school about a different committee, something that would take her out of the classroom one afternoon a week and into something new, and I said that sounded right. We talked for a minute about Gracie's whelk shell, which had already been placed on the kitchen windowsill in the position of maximum visibility. Then I got in the truck and she went back inside, and I watched the door close in the rearview mirror as I pulled out of the driveway. The drive north on Route 17 took 25 minutes, the same as always. I had the window down slightly, and the air coming in still carried salt from the coast, thinner than at the beach. But there, a trace of it. I came home to the yellow door and the quiet kitchen and the 2 drawings on the counter. I put the kettle on and then didn't make tea. Just stood there looking at the drawings while the kettle came to temperature. The old one with the 3 crayon figures and the word June, and the newer one with the beach house and the faces in the clouds. I sat down at the table, and I understood, sitting there with the salt air still faint in the room, that this was the morning I had been thinking of when I started telling you this story. The porch at sunrise, the photograph of June on the side table, the house I had built for someone else. This is where the story ends, I had said then. But to understand why I'm sitting here this morning, you have to let me take you back to the beginning. Now you have been there. Now you are back. I built that house to keep a promise. It turns out the house kept something for me, too, even from 25 minutes away. I built a house thinking a deed was enough to protect the people I loved. I was wrong. This family story taught me one thing above all. Love without documentation is a prayer. I believe God answers prayers, but He also gave us the wisdom to sign the paperwork. Do not wait until someone is already inside your house to start asking who they really are. I made 2 mistakes. I loaned money without a contract because I wanted to believe in a man. I handed over a house worth nearly $400,000 with nothing but a deed because I confused trust with security. Trust is what you feel. Security is what you build. My advice: do not be like me. Write the contract. Set up the trust. Pay attention to the small things that do not add up, because in my experience, they are never actually small. Every grandpa story worth telling carries a lesson like this one. This is mine. That is my personal view, and I stand by it. Every family story has a moment where someone should have looked more carefully and did not. I hope this family story saves someone else from the same mistake.